Deported and Displaced, the U.S. Venezuela immigration battle. The Venezuelan government has announced that it will resume accepting deportation flights from the United States, marking a significant shift in immigration policy. The decision comes after mounting pressure from the Trump administration, which has aggressively sought to deport migrants, particularly those from Venezuela. The first flight carrying deported Venezuelans is expected to land as early as Sunday. A key factor in Venezuela's decision appears to be the plight of its citizens, who were recently sent to notorious prisons in El Salvador without due process. Venezuelan officials condemned these deportations, stating, "Migration isn't a crime, and we will not rest until we achieve the return of all of those in need and rescue our brothers kidnapped in El Salvador." Despite requests for comment, the White House remained silent. However, Richard Grenell, a close ally of President Trump, confirmed that Venezuela had agreed to resume accepting the deportation flights. This agreement follows a period of strained relations after the Trump administration revoked a Biden-era policy that permitted increased oil production in Venezuela. In response, Venezuela's leader, Nicolás Maduro, has suspended deportation cooperation. Since that suspension, the Trump administration has intensified its push for Latin American countries to accept more deportees. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that Venezuela would face severe and escalating sanctions if it did not comply. The backdrop of this deportation crisis is the record number of Venezuelans crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, fleeing economic collapse and political instability. The Venezuelan government attributes these hardships to U.S. sanctions imposed on the Maduro regime. The recent agreement also follows the Trump administration's controversial use of the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime authority from 1798 to deport Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. El Salvador's authoritarian leader agreed to accept them, placing them in overcrowded prisons infamous for human rights abuses. The decision sparked widespread criticism and legal challenges, with a federal judge in Washington issuing a temporary order halting deportations under this law. President Trump has defended the use of the law, insisting that the migrants sent to El Salvador were criminal gang members. However, their families and immigration advocates dispute this claim, arguing that many deportees had no criminal ties. Despite the court ruling, the Trump administration has been evasive, with Judge James E. Boasberg stating, "The government is not being cooperative at this point, but I will get to the bottom of whether they violated my order and who was responsible." This legal battle coincides with Trump's broader agenda to ramp up deportations, a key promise of his campaign. He has already enlisted military aircraft, sent deportees to third countries, and invoked wartime laws to bypass legal obstacles. Although arrest rates have surged, they remain below the levels desired by Trump and his immigration advisors. Saturday's agreement between Venezuela and the U.S. aligns with another major policy shift: the termination of a Biden-era program that allowed migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to enter the U.S. legally and work for up to 2 years. The first flight under the renewed deportation policy has already landed at Simon Bolivar Airport near Caracas, carrying 199 Venezuelans. The process, however, was not direct. Before reaching Venezuela, deportees were first transported from Texas to Honduras, then flown via Venezuela's national airline, Conviasa, to Caracas. The U.S. Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs labeled them illegal aliens with no basis to remain in the United States. In contrast, Jorge Rodriguez, head of Venezuela's National Assembly, countered, "Migration is not a crime." The groundwork for Venezuela's acceptance of deportation flights was laid in January when Trump's special envoy Richard Grenell brokered a deal with the Maduro government. The move was celebrated by Trump's administration as a diplomatic win, reinforcing his hardline stance on immigration. However, diplomatic tensions escalated in March when the Trump administration revoked Chevron's license to operate in Venezuela. Maduro criticized the decision, stating, "They damaged the line of communication we had opened, and I was interested in those lines of communication because I wanted to bring home all the Venezuelans they have in custody, whom they have unjustly persecuted." A week later, the Trump administration sent 238 Venezuelans to a high-security prison in El Salvador, claiming they were members of the Tren de Aragua criminal gang. The move outraged many Venezuelan families who insisted their relatives had no criminal affiliations. The human cost of these deportations became evident when a mother in Venezuela recognized her son in footage from El Salvador's notorious prison. It's him, she cried, horrified by the conditions he was now enduring. Trump took to his social media platform, Truth Social, to justify the mass deportations, stating that Venezuela has been very hostile to the United States. He accused the Venezuelan government of deliberately sending thousands of criminals, including murderers, to the U.S. In a retaliatory move, Trump announced a secondary tariff on Venezuela. Under this policy, any nation purchasing oil and gas from Venezuela would face a 25% tariff when trading with the United States. The deportations to El Salvador's brutal prisons had an immediate impact. Days after the news broke, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a stark warning on social media. Venezuela will face severe and escalating sanctions if it refuses to accept its citizens deported from the U.S. The next day, President Maduro responded. He directed his government to step up the action needed to guarantee return flights for detained migrants. His swift action indicated an attempt to avoid further economic repercussions while maintaining control over Venezuela's deported citizens. The resumption of deportation flights is a victory for Trump's immigration policy, but a deeply contentious issue in the broader human rights debate. With no end in sight to Venezuela's economic crisis and ongoing political tension between the two nations, the fate of deported migrants remains uncertain.
Thank you for watching PJ Pro TV.